Sisters and Brothers, Jennifer McCary from Glasgow Trades Council, speaking in support of the motion, and would just like to add an additional contribution to the debate and discussion, because this is an issue that's enormously impacted in our city, where the exploitation of migrant care workers has really came to the fore in the last year and a half. We're celebrating 850 years of Glasgow, and as part of that, we're looking at the workers' contribution to that, and we were able to pick apart the contribution that our Trades Council made, establishing itself to tackle the Master and Servant Act back in the mid-1800s. And it is absolutely incredulous that we see a group of workers in our city who are effectively tied to their employer, who cannot voice dissent, who cannot change jobs because of the nature of their ability to work. It is wholly unhealthy, and it is wholly contradictory to the principles of fair work, but yet it is often carried out under a contract which is funded by public money and managed by public authorities. That is completely intolerable, delegates. One of the other aspects that migrant workers can face in the work of social care is that some of the less reputable employers have no concern about using exploitative measures to divide the workforce. So you can have workforces that are completely divided on the grounds of race by shift patterns, which does nothing for building social cohesion in our society, but it certainly allows the employer to control the workforce in a way that suits them. Also, there's another issue that has come up over the last 5 weeks, and that is the migrant worker pay rate. It means that migrant workers are only allowed to be employed if they receive an hourly rate of £12.82, but the Scottish Government's hourly rate for care workers is £12.60. This leaves us in an intolerable position where you either pay a different rate of pay for migrant workers and non-migrant workers, or else we just don't have migrant workers anymore in the care system. Both of those facts are completely intolerable, and they are predicated on the fact that care is deeply exploitative and underpaid. We have to find a way out.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Of this,
could you wind up?
And we call on the public authorities, including local councils and IJBs, to take action.
Thanks, Jennifer. I see no further speakers in this debate. That was Composite M, covering motions 90 and 91, End Slavery and Exploitation in Health and Social Care. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I'll move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thanks, colleagues. That's Composite M, covering motions 90 and 91, End Slavery and Exploitation in Health and Social Care, is carried. Congress, I call Composite N, covering amended motions 102 and motion 103, Scottish Visa Campaign. Can I invite Midlothian Trades Union Council to move the composite?
President, Congress, Lynn Patterson, Midlothian Trade Unions Council, moving Composite N for a Scottish Visa Campaign. The motion calls for a Scottish visa, but why? It's because if we build a campaign for a devolved immigration system in Scotland, like they have in Quebec, we can demand an alternative that won't rely on the Home Office. The Home Office, which is creating disgusting deportation videos to satisfy the nativist, racist vote which they are desperately trying to shore up. Without independence, this seems unlikely, but devolving immigration to the people of Scotland, we can allow people to build a life for themselves and a healthy future for people coming to work from Commonwealth countries without fear of being deported or the visa earnings threshold being increased, which is purely a gimmick to win over more reform voters. We need to call for an alternative within the trade union movement, an alternative immigration system, which can be achieved by devolving powers to Scotland. I just want to read some statements from affected members and how it impacts, the impact the present system has on them. They say, "It's a cruel technicality that threatens to uproot my life. I'm earning £30,975 as an EO. This would qualify as a new entrant visa, but it's the hourly rate calculation that's the problem. The Home Office is trying to argue that we are working 42 hours a week, just because that's what was written on the job offer letter. But in reality, we're working 37. We came here and are legal and are paying our taxes. We're trying to abide by the law of the land. It's so unfair after we've built a life here. I've been here for 4 years, and now the government is trying to tell me to leave. It's a terrible situation. Going back to Nigeria will be like a suicide mission. It's not safe now. The security situation is terrible. I was almost kidnapped in 2021, and I've been assaulted by the police. And that's part of the reason that I asked to do my master's here." Another affected PCS member has stated, "We cannot plan anything. This has stalled everything that we want to do with our life. It's hanging over our heads. We try to do our best and come to work and just block it out. It's obvious that the cruelty that the It's obvious that the cruelty of the Home Office knows no bounds. This Labour government will deport and film the cruelty that they inflict on the immigrants that they once welcomed. And we say, ne passeran. We need immigration devolved as a matter of urgency. And the trade union movement should get behind calls to devolve immigration for a decent and humane system." Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call Edinburgh Trade Union Council to second the composite. Thank you.
President Congress, Steve West on behalf of Edinburgh Trade Union Council to second composite motion N. Now, the SNP MP Stephen Geffins has proposed a private member's bill in the House of Commons which would amend the Scotland Act 1998 to allow the Scottish Government to set up a Scottish visa scheme. The bill proposes to devolve more powers over immigration to Holyrood to increase Scotland's workforce in the hospitality, tourism and care sectors, all of which are undergoing a recruitment crisis. And I really hope the bill succeeds, not only because we need more workers in Scotland, but because, let's be clear, excluding workers who come from abroad is racist. And the Tory UK government's decision last April to increase the earnings threshold for workers from Commonwealth countries and the Labour government's complete failure to even consider overturning that decision are racist acts. These acts play into the narrative that says people who come from abroad should have to prove they can earn above a certain amount before they can be allowed to work in and stay in the UK. And in practice, the workers concerned are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Congress, this amounts to institutional racism, and we must not put up with it. So we urgently need a Scottish visa, but it needs to be extended. What about those people who deliver benefits, who are represented by PCS, who are going to speak next? What about those people who work in job centres? Lots of them are threatened by this as well, and it's not good enough. That needs to be extended to those workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call PCS to speak in support of the composite motion. Thank you.
Cormac Ray, PCS. So the previous Tory government announced changes to workplace visa rules, in particular the skilled visa earnings threshold. This is now affecting large numbers of civil servants, including hundreds of PCS members in the DWP, many of whom are based in Scotland. These rules set new thresholds on the minimum salary and on the pay per hour required for an individual to continue employment on their workplace visas. In the DWP, the issue is the hourly rate is calculated on 42 hours gross, despite the fact that we work 37.5 hours net. This means our members do not meet the hourly rate needed to remain. The huge increase to the income threshold from 26,000 to 38,000 means the earnings required now for these workers to remain in their jobs is impossible for the vast majority, which means many hundreds of PCS members, as things stand, will be unable to continue once their current visas expire. This disproportionately affects black members, in particular from Commonwealth countries, and makes no sense to have to dismiss hard-working public servants from already understaffed departments. These civil servants have found themselves in extremely distressing situations, worrying about their own jobs and their families' future in the UK, and it's causing serious trauma and upheaval unnecessarily. Farouk, who has played a significant part of leading the campaign from his branch in Forth Valley, was working tirelessly to help hundreds of affected members with advice and support. He went to Westminster to meet the PCS parliamentary group, but his campaigning has come to an end. I want to say thank you to him and other PCS members for their tireless efforts to challenge this. The motion talks about a Scottish visa and calls on the STUC to join PCS in making the case to the Home Office to change these rules, as UK government policy is having direct negative consequences for a large number of hard-working and valuable members of our communities and workplaces. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call any other supporting or opposing speakers. No other speakers? Thank you, Congress. That was Composite N, covering amended motions 102 and 103, Scottish Visa Campaign. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I'll now take you to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Composite N, covering motions 90 and 91, End Slavery and Exploitation in Health and Social Care, is carried. Congress, I call Composite O, covering motions 104 and motion 105, Winter Fuel Allowance. I invite West Lothian Trades Council to move the composite motion. Thank you, Delegate.
Lewis Clark, West Lothian Trade Union Council, first time delegate and first time speaker. Congress. 9 months ago, 14 years of Tory chaos was brought to an end with the election of a Labour government, with a massive majority of 166 seats, and it was elected on the promise of change. As a Trade Union Congress, it would be churlish to not recognise that there has been some positive change, most notably with the Employment Rights Bill, which repealed the Minimal Service Levels Act and reformed the trade union legislation. But any credit that this Labour government may have got for that legislation has been drowned out by a series of appalling policy choices that have impacted on some of the lowest paid, poorest and most vulnerable members of our community. The two-child cap, a pernicious policy that's sole purpose is to make families poorer, has been kept. The WASPy women, who have run a tremendous campaign for pensions justice, were drowning in Labour candidates who were falling over themselves to get photos taken with campaigners before the election, only to be abandoned by those very same politicians after the election. And most notably, we've seen the sickening attack on the social security system that allows the sick and disabled to live with dignity. Less than a month after securing victory, pensioners were first in the firing line for Labour's assault on the welfare state, when the winter fuel allowance, one of the first acts of the 1997 Labour government to help address pensioner poverty, was removed for all but the very poorest of pensioners. None of these policies were in the Labour manifesto. Not one pensioner, not one parent, not one WASPy woman, not one disabled citizen went into the polling booth knowing that the people they may be voting for were going to make them poorer. This is a government elected on a false prospectus, systematically betraying the people who voted for them, going even further than the Tories on cuts to the welfare state, plunging millions of our fellow citizens into hardship and poverty. The pensioners losing their winter fuel payment are losing £200 to £300 a year. This will plunge well over 100,000 of them into fuel poverty. This is at a time when we've got big energy companies making record profits. West Lothian Trade Council urges Congress to support this motion. We urge the Government to end its attack on the poor and reinstate the winter fuel allowance. Balancing the books on the backs of the poor and low paid to fund corporate tax breaks is cruel and unjust. They must tax the wealthy and corporations and do what it said it would do and deliver real change for working people. Congress, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call Aberdeen Trades Union Council to second the composite motion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Stephen Gray, Aberdeen Trades Union Council. I must support this motion, as does my colleagues on the Aberdeen Trade Union Council, despite having almost as many millionaires as London in Aberdeen. We're a very much divided society. The rich are ultra rich and the poor are ultra poor. And the winter fuel allowance cuts right to the heart of this. The poorest in society are basically covering the cost of the richest in society. That's social injustice of the worst form. Council, Congress, I move that they support this motion. Congress calls upon the STUC General Council to lobby the Scottish Government to restore the universal winter fuel allowance for Scottish pensioners for this coming winter. I so move. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I now call any supporting or opposing speakers. No further speakers in the debate. That was Composite O, covering motions 104 and motion 105, winter fuel allowance. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I will now take you to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Composite O, covering motions 104, 105, winter fuel allowance is carried. Congress, I now call amended motion 88. Let's talk about assisted dying, and I invite Unison to move the amended motion. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. President Congress, Mark Ferguson, Unison Scotland, moving amended motion 88. Let's talk about assisted dying. Firstly, I'd like to commend Fife Trades Council for kick-starting this discussion at last year's Congress, and I welcome their amendment to strengthen this motion. Congress, assisted dying is an emotive and complex subject with deeply held and polarised views. The political debate has moved on considerably this past year. In Scotland, the Lead Committee's final report is due imminently, and the Stage 1 parliamentary debate on the principle of assisted dying is scheduled to take place in May. Proponents view this as a human rights debate, a fundamental right to make choices and decisions in relation to your own life, as long as it doesn't harm others. The ability to be in control over decisions that affect you and have assisted dying as one option for end of life. On the flip side, those opposed generally have concerns based on religious, moral or political arguments. Concerns are expressed that there will be further widening of eligibility and reduction of safeguards over time, that it devalues the lives of vulnerable groups, and that vulnerable people are at risk of coercion. Irrespective of where you sit on the issue, these are all valid views. However, Congress, the purpose of this motion isn't to advocate either way for the bill. To quote disability rights campaigner Professor Tom Shakespeare, people do not oppose assisted dying with one voice. At a minimum, the views of the wider community are more mixed than the views of its leaders. In its submission to initial call for views, the Scottish Human Rights Commission, quoting from the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Disabled People, though the sentiment applies to all people, it is paramount that the voices of people of all ages and backgrounds are heard when drafting laws, policies and regulations that affect their rights, and especially when we talk about the right to life. Today's debate is to mandate the General Council to facilitate a survey on the subject to give our members a voice in the debate and influence over our collective policy position. However the survey is taken forward, it's critical that it's based on a single question, set and capable of analysis as a single study, and this can be achieved led by a short-term working group. If assisted dying legislation is passed, then it will be the most significant societal change in Scotland since the likes of the ending of capital punishment in 1965, legalising abortion in 1967, and the legalisation of same-sex marriages in 2014. To achieve a policy position on a decision that significant, to allow eligible people to choose based on their sincere beliefs what a good death will be for them, we believe must be shaped by the views of our collective membership, and a survey is a way to achieve this. An approach that our disabled members at the STUC Disabled Workers Conference unanimously supported in November last year. Congress, please support this motion. I move.
Thanks, Mark. Can I now invite Fife Trade Union Council to second the amended motion? Thank you.
Hi there, Lisi Copier, Fife Trade Union Council. Now, we all have to die. That's the reason we put forward the amendment to this motion. As a matter of fact, if any group's got a special interest in it, it's old people like me. I'm 72. In the 30-plus places of the world where assisted dying is legal, most are elderly and most are about to die from cancer. We're always strongest when we're sticking together. Now, first thing I have to say, please, friends, before you fill out the survey, if you possibly can, read the proposed Holyrood Bill. This could be your death. It's not that difficult to read, and it'll certainly, in any circumstances, be easier than your union rule book. Also, remember that this bill is not based on the Canada law. There's a lot of stories about Canada which are circulating. They're all disputed. Whatever you believe about them, this doesn't have to be a slippery slope. The slippery slope idea means that you don't think you can be involved in a democratic process. Friends, we are involved in a democratic process, and that's one of the reasons why we're in trade unions. We need to fill this survey out so that we can have an insight, not just about our views about assisted dying, but about the alternatives, in particular palliative care. Now, one thing I'd like to bring up is something that was taken in the focus group that we've just been in with Liam MacArthur, and it's unassisted suicides due to intolerable pain. Apparently, 2.5 times people who are in 2.5 times people in the intolerable pain group are 2.5 times more likely to commit suicide. I do have a figure of 300 to 650 annually in the UK, but the truth is we don't know how many. If someone hangs themselves, poisons themselves, suffocates themselves, it will be reported as a suicide. But
thank you, Delegate. Thank you.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. It's common to decide to starve yourself to death, and then that may be regarded as just an organ failure. Think of how we took this on with the legal abortions in the 67 Act. I just second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Congress, I now move to any supporting or opposing speakers in the debate. Ben?
Good afternoon, comrades. Ben Lunn speaking on behalf of the Musicians' Union in support of this particular motion. Last year, I was very honoured to be able to speak on the General Council statement on this, and one of the points we made within this is the need to have debate and discussion. It is a very important thing. However, the problem that I have seen and observed is a lot of the discussion is around morality of the question, not necessarily beyond, or other things coinciding with that. And this particular issue goes beyond morality. If we just had to discuss the morality of this issue, given the camaraderie spirit that we have here in the room and trade union discipline, I'm sure we'd actually be able to come to a nice resolution very quickly and get it done by the end of order of business today. However, the issue goes beyond that because it is about legislation. Legislation goes significantly further because the implications of legislation can go beyond what our morality and our moral feeling of a particular thing is. Much as we have seen about the recent developments in relation to the Supreme Court, the impact of interpretation of law and other things like that have massive implications that go much further than just what we believe about certain rights and so on. So, with the looking at Westminster as their process has moved further along, we have to assess the legislation as it stands currently, and we have to think about and discuss the legislation. The Select Committee has gone through and is getting ready to then deliver the bill for second reading, and things that have developed within the Select Committee have included removing the safeguards for people who are autistic and neurodiverse. So someone like myself, I am no longer protected by this bill. The safeguarding regarding to the advertisement of assisted dying within elderly care homes has been removed. So any grandparents of ours, they could be sat happily in their care home and advertised assisted dying. That has not been ruled out. Similarly, the safeguards around telling children around assisted dying has not been maintained as well. This is another thing we have to consider. The idea of someone as young as 4 could be offered assisted dying, and we have to think about where does our morality and the practicality of legislation comes in. I appreciate I am running out of time, so ultimately I want to end on this. We need to be mindful of legislation, we need to be thorough, and we need to really get into it. Support the bill, support the debate, but make sure that legislation is at the core of how we're discussing. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thanks, Ben. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Congress. Leila Roxanne Hill, speaking on behalf of the National Union of Journalists. Yes, that was all. We recognise the bill and the arguments for and against, from those arguing for the right for a pain-free death and to those concerned with assisted dying being normalised in an era of intentional health and social care austerity. We also recognise that some media organisations have already taken a very partisan position and, without being aware of the full facts, might bias the debate with one-sided reports. We were just at our NUJ conference at the weekend, and we're happy to announce that our union have agreed to provide guidance and a code of conduct on assisted dying, which will be provided to NUJ members to ensure full factual coverage. We're concerned that the nuanced views of disabled people and disability organisations are overlooked in reporting and in policy matters which have a direct impact on their lives. And on that note, Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I have the next speaker, please?
Marion Hirsch, University and College Union, speaking against the motion. We agree that this is a very complicated and emotive subject. We, as a union, we support discussion and debate, canvassing views, and finding out what safeguards people think are necessary. However, this motion goes a lot further than that. It calls for using a survey to draw up a united policy position. It doesn't say exactly how this policy position will be obtained, as I understand it. Normally, the STUC makes policy through Congress, but there isn't a suggestion in this to bring either a proposal to the next Congress or to have an additional Congress, if that would be feasible, to make a decision. It's also an issue where people have very, very strong views on both or possibly all sides of the debate. And it is likely that that if a policy position were reached, that probably about half our union, our movement, our trade union movement, would end up opposed to it for a variety of reasons, whether personal, whether based on experience, whether moral, religious, or other. And yes, we can't have 100% agreement on everything, but there is value in proceeding in a way which encourages unity. And I would suggest this motion doesn't do this. It's going to polarize the debate more because it's going to try and get a policy where a unified policy where this isn't possible. And I would suggest that just as with the referendum debate,
thank you, Marion. Could
we
you
agree. Can I have my last
conclude,
sentence?
please? Thank you.
We agree that this isn't possible, and therefore I strongly urge you to vote against the motion.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I call the next speaker, please?
Good afternoon, Congress. Fiona McKellar, Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. Assisted dying is without a doubt one of the most emotive subjects. Last year, Unison's motion on the bill moving through Parliament was remitted to General Council, recognising the newness of discussions on this subject to most trade unions attending, including my own. The bill proposing the removal of a blanket ban on assisted dying has been previously debated and defeated in both Westminster and the Scottish Parliament. However, it is unclear if trade unions, including my own, have the knowledge and understanding of member opinion to have an informed stance. We recognise this is a genuinely new area of policy that unions have to debate in depth, and this complex issue will likely continue to have an impact on members on many levels. We need to carefully consider the impact changes in assisted dying legislation may have on members, and in particular, respectfully, our most vulnerable members. Last year, we took this issue to our own membership and asked CSP Council to start discussions on assisted dying, to consider what informed responses or processes might look like for our membership and increase awareness and gauge reactions. We need to continue to refine this debate, taking cognizance from those very individuals it may have the most impact on, and ensure that any policy positions reflect our members' views. Congress, please support.
Thank you. Final speaker, thank you.
Sisters and brothers, Keith Stoddart, Glasgow District Trades Council. I suppose I'm up here, I'm not suggesting it's a Damascus road, but I've previously spoken in favour of assisted dying. And I think that was because it was essentially presented to me as being, as Lacey illustrated, that it was about older people and it was around cancer and, well, horrible deaths. However, I think there is a need for a conversation because the more that I've actually got into this, the more I've established it's not quite as clear-cut as I thought. Both the bills in Holyrood and down in Westminster say something along the lines that the proposals are that should a doctor believe you have a terminal illness and only 6 months to live, you should be able to access the means of an assisted death. Now that sounds quite clear-cut. However, actually, it's a lot more subjective than that. For example, and I know we've been told not to look at other places where where assisted suicide is possible. For example, in Origin, Doctors have interpreted that to include malnutrition in teenagers caused by eating disorders and allowed access to assisted suicide. Here, when points like that have been put to those who have written both the bills, they have rejected amendments backed by eating disorder charities to prevent this happening, leaving people with learning difficulties, depression, suicide or alcohol misuse that might impair their judgment. That would not preclude someone from seeking a medically assisted death. I can see I have to get a hand up. And one of the things is, I think we should note that as the brain surgeon Henry Marsh, who quoted in the Observer, one of the leading proponents of assisted death, said in the Observer, don't judge me, somebody has to read it, if a few grannies get bullied into it, then that's a price worth paying for all the people who could die with dignity. I don't think that's right, and I think we have to have a greater discussion on the whole matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Congress, there has been opposition in this motion. Does the mover want the right of reply? Thank you. Mark.
Colleagues, Mark Ferguson, Unison Scotland. As I said in my contribution, that all views on this issue are relevant. The motion doesn't take a position, but it does call for the raising of awareness amongst our membership and our community and creating debate. This is a trade union issue because it's about us, our members, our communities, and for the workers that we represent who will be asked, if this bill passes, to take part in providing that essential care at the end of life. And if it doesn't pass, it's opening a wider debate about palliative care, where our members are also involved. So as a collective body of trade unions, we need to be ready to support our members in helping to create policy and procedures to safeguard them in their work, and also to make sure their voice as parts of the general population are also heard. We don't have time, colleagues, because the bill is at stage 1, it's progressing through Parliament, and we need to be ready that if it does progress beyond stage 1, that we're ready to input our knowledge, our views into the amendment stage. And that is why we believe the questionnaire is essential to obtain the views of affiliates. And whether or not we come to a collective position, I think it's important that we have that debate, we obtain that information, and we take on the responsibility that our members give us to make sure that we put the safeguards in place that they need moving forward. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, colleagues, for that debate. That was amended motion 88. Let's talk about assisted dying. Please note that the General Council recommends support. Can I take you to the vote and see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Thank you. Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Sorry, amended motion 88. Let's talk about assisted dying is carried. Congress, can I now call on motion 88, the CAS report and countering its bias, and I invite STUC LGBT+ conference to move the motion. Thank you, Michael.
President, Congress, Michael Craig, STUC LGBT+ Workers Conference, moving motion 89. Congress, the CAS report published in April 24 has been met with serious and widespread criticism. Experts in trans healthcare, educational psychologists and academics have all raised the alarm. They have challenged its flawed methodology and consistencies and clear bias. This report has been rightly accused of misusing evidence, making unfounded claims and authoring unethical recommendations and intentionally excluding the very voices of trans people and their healthcare experts. Let me be clear, the CAS report is not an objective piece of work. As the international evidence-based critique points out, and I quote, the review repeatedly misuses data, violates its own standards, and rests many conclusions on pure speculation. It subverts the well-established principles of clinical research and repeats discredited myths about trans people. Congress, this is not science. It's a prejudice dressed up as research, and it has already been weaponised against our trans communities. We know the real harm this causes. Young people who are not supported in their gender identity suffer higher rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm and suicide. And yet, here in Scotland, trans and non-binary young people are facing waiting times of up to 4 years for a first appointment at a gender identity clinic. 4 years. Imagine telling another group of young people that they must wait 4 years to access life-saving care. It would be a national scandal. We must demand an immediate inquiry into those intolerable waiting times. We must fight for investment, for services and for care that meets the needs of every young person, not just those who fit in narrow, prejudiced models. Congress, much has already been said about puberty blockers. These have been used safely for decades to treat early puberty. If they are safe for one group of children, they are safe for all. Singling out trans young people is nothing short of discrimination. We must call this out and challenge it whenever it appears. Our trans siblings face daily violence and hate, especially trans women of colour, who are at disproportionately higher risk of fatal violence. This is not abstract. This is happening now. And it is fuelled by a climate of misinformation, fear-mongering that reports like Cass only make worse. And while the recent Supreme Court ruling clarified the meaning of Sex and the Equality Act, it is our duty to ensure that it does not strip away protections from our trans communities. Trans men are men, trans women are women, and every person has the right to live in dignity in their true gender, free from discrimination. Congress, we must unite and stand against the Scottish Government's endorsement of the Cass report, its flaws findings, and we must demand better for our young people. We must stand for inclusive, evidence-based, life-affirming healthcare. Support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
I now call a seconder for the motion.
Hello everyone, Congress President Cheryl Govin here from the STUC Black Workers Conference, first time delegate and speaker, seconding motion 89, thank you, so kind. We all know the adage, an injury to one is an injury to all, and I am unclear if Hilary Cass is aware of the injury that she has caused. I'm not here to debate whether trans and non-binary people should exist. There's frankly no debate in my mind. As an Indian woman, I have seen third-gendered Hijra people revered in my culture, and it is European colonialism that has tried to lessen their worth, or worse, eradicate them. The Cass report reminds me of the UK race report that found no evidence of institutional racism in the UK. Remember that? Selective analysis is selective. What can I say? Onto the Cass report itself, I hold a doctorate in biomedical engineering. This report is doing the equivalent of wanting to shorten waiting lists for like a knee replacement surgery by stopping carrying out knee replacements. It just makes no sense. The report states there is weak research into hormonal and non-hormonal interventions. For no other medical research is healthcare stopped because evidence is weak. You should do the opposite, liaise with the experts who don't want this stopped and conduct more research. The report found no clear explanation for the rise in children with gender dysphoria. If you ask me, it's clearly because of our trans elders that we stand on the shoulders of. The report suggests that youth who desire puberty blockers should be registered in research trials to receive them. This is wildly unethical. And linking back to my earlier example, we would never allow access to knee replacement only if they're in a medical trial. Vasily Crispy of the BMA was correct in stating that the Cass review was commissioned, funded and published by an openly gender-critical government, representing a conflict of interest. And for the current Labour government to continue the harm of the Tories is totally on brand. To carry out the action stated in this motion go some way to help our trans youth, protect the dolls, and please support this motion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate. Can I now call on any other supporting or opposing speakers in the debate?
President, Congress, Mike Corbett, NASUWT. Let me begin by saying trans rights are human rights, and until the last few years that seemed to be unarguable and accepted by the vast majority of the population. However, the Cass report last year heralded a significant shift when we saw the moral panic and misinformation that had swirled around the media and social media for some time crystallised in an official report. A report that has since been challenged and its methodology and conclusions significantly undermined by academics, psychologists and medical professionals across the world. Yet, this past fortnight has seen further official judgments and guidance via the Supreme Court and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which will only make the lives of trans people in this country harder. I'm here to express my huge concerns about the safety of trans people across the UK. That includes our members as teachers, the pupils they teach who need support and understanding, and personally for me, my family. I have a teenage trans daughter. Before she came out as trans 2.5 years ago, she was quite an anxious child. She required careful supervision and support by her teachers and from ourselves. But since coming out, she has changed enormously and flourished. She's much more confident. She has a far wider social circle. She's sailed through her National 5 and higher exams. She's sitting advanced hires over the next few weeks. She volunteers at a charity shop twice a week. In every way, she would seem to be a model citizen. And yet, the CAST report, the Supreme Court judgment, the EHRC guidance make her feel unwelcome in her own country. We have genuinely been looking at countries that she might move to in the future that actually treat trans folk with dignity and respect. And that's the sad reality for trans people in this country right now. It's something we need to fight. We need to fight hard. So please support this vital motion for the sake of our teachers, for our pupils, and for my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for sharing your personal experience. Really powerful speech, thank you. Can I call the next speaker, please?
Hello, Congress. I'm Ken. I'm a pharmacist. I'm part of the STUC Youth Conference by way of PDA and Pharmacist Defence Association. I have 2 points to make. As a pharmacist, I can tell you puberty blockers in trans children are safe and effective medicine. They provide significant benefit to trans children with minimal side effects. There is a risk of osteoporosis, but what is broken bones to a broken life, I ask you? There is significant benefit in that puberty blockers are reversible because that's the first line of medical treatment basically, is that you trial puberty blockers and if gender dysphoria dissipates, that you are confident that it will work for the trans children because other steps would be include surgery and hormones that can significantly are, obviously less reversible than the first option. And limiting this use is actually extremely dangerous to trans children. And we need to recognize that this is a safe, effective medication. The other point I wanted to make is slightly off topic, but the Institute of Sexual Sciences was made possible by Magnus Hirschfeld, a German sexologist in 1933, and they explored a lot around what we know of transgender healthcare, and they were the target of the first book burnings condemnation by the Nazi Germany. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now. The fascist right targets the most vulnerable in our society in order to gain ground for them to progress, to control the population. And we, as STUC, need to support trans people, need to work with NHS Scotland to ensure these essential medicines are delivered to trans children and make sure that we make safe for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Can I see the next speaker, please?
Congress. For the past 10 years, trans people have been the target of a dehumanizing media campaign that portrays trans women as predators and trans men as confused victims of ideology. In these media narratives, we have been robbed of our agency. Today, we are being robbed of our rights. In 2020, the culture war Tory government equalities team of Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss issued 2 studies, the STUC report and the CAST review. The STUC report denied the existence of institutional racism in the UK. The CAST review denied the existence of the mountain of evidence as to the benefits of gender-affirming care for trans youth. And what were the consequences? For the chair of both reviews, celebrations from our right-wing media and a seat in the House of Lords. For the target of those studies, the Black Lives Matter movement was undermined and institutional racism continued. And for trans youth, the removal of vital and, in some cases, life-saving gender-affirming healthcare. We are the target of an increasingly familiar playbook in which exclusionary panels on reviews or Supreme Court judgments are being used to take away our rights, ruining our lives to please the media and to please the powerful financial backers and forces that often fund these attacks. On the Cass Review panel, not a single trans person or expert advocate from trans healthcare was included, although at least 2 of the panel had associations to conversion therapy. And in the past 2 weeks, we have seen a continuation of the anti-equalities playbook, a Supreme Court decision that excluded any trans or trans advocacy groups, although it included several trans exclusionary groups. Congress, we are losing our rights due to political stitch-ups. The key union principle is an attack on one is an attack on all. Congress, please support this motion and condemns the stitch-up of the Cass Review, which has robbed trans people of their health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any further speakers? Kate?
Kate Ramsden from Aberdeenshire, from Aberdeen Trade Union Council, sorry. I want to raise some concerns about this motion. And I know we've heard a lot about it being anti-trans. And to be honest, I've read the Cass Review, and that is not how I read it. But I did read it about children's rights, because I worked with children, children who'd been in care, etc. And a number of those children were exploring their identity when they were teenagers. Of course they were. Children at that age always do. But quite a large number of them who were accepted in an affirmative way have changed their mind as they've gotten a bit older. Now, I'm not saying everybody does, and I know there's statistics that suggest that a lot of young people don't. But the reality is, despite what's been said, that puberty blockers are unknown. The long-term effects on puberty blockers are still unknown. And I think that young people should be of an age where they can really make that decision before they're put down that route. And I do think that's a child protection issue, and I do not call it conversion therapy when social workers and psychiatrists help a young person explore all aspects of their personality, because we know a lot of them have other issues around as well. So I am just a bit concerned about the trade union movement in Scotland getting involved in just opposing Cass on this basis. I think we should wait for the BMA's neutral review of the Cass Review before making the decision. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but I do just want people to think a little bit about the implications of why Cass made the recommendations that she did for children. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Kate, could you confirm, Kate, Aberdeen Trade Union Council, are you opposing the motion?
No, I just wanted to raise the concerns.
So there's no opposition to the motion. I'm going to move to, that was motion 89, Cass report and countering its bias. Please note that the General Council recommends support. Now I want to move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Motion 89, Cash report and countering its bias, is carried. I now call amended motion 101, defending the right to protest. I invite the STUC Youth Conference to move the amended motion. Thank you.
Congress, Colm McHale, STUC Youth Conference, moving motion 101, defend the right to protest. Comrades, across this land, our hard-won democratic right to protest is under attack. Our trade union movement already faces the most restrictive labour laws in Europe, and the new Labour government is yet to wipe them from the statute book. Climate activists in Britain are imprisoned for years for simply planning a protest via Zoom. And in recent months, the British state has turned its attention to the anti-war movement, arresting upwards of 70 pro-Palestine activists in London this January and dozens of peaceful protesters on various occasions across the country in the months that followed. On the 17th of January in London, one woman wearing a keffiyeh reported that she was arrested by the police for arriving at that protest, quote, too early. Friends, when our movement's punctuality is criminalised, make no mistake, our civil liberties are under threat. And is it any wonder that this attack comes from Keir Starmer, the same man who during the London riots of 2011 abandoned sentencing guidelines so as the courts could run round the clock to ensure the criminalisation of our right to protest. The result of that decision then for people like Nicholas Robinson was 6 months behind bars for pocketing a £3.50 bottle of water. The function of this crackdown on our right to protest, which is in no way limited to just south of the border, is to demobilise mass political expression in this country and limit the agency of the British public. Using the long arm of the state, Keir Starmer and his government seek to minimise popular confrontation with his government. Because if the periodic, organised intrusions of the British public into the political sphere can be limited, then that political sphere will remain exclusively the domain of their wealthy allies, the lobbyists and their private clients, the enemies of our movement. On the question of Palestine, the anti-war movement has plainly illustrated through the strength of our mobilisation week after week, month after month, that the interests of British imperialism sit beyond the remit of representative democracy. We've won the argument among the public, and a crackdown is the consequence. This repression is not because they don't like us, although that might be true. It's because by December 2023, 70% of the British public supported an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, but found almost no representation for their support of this position among mainstream British political parties. They found it instead on the streets of Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh and London. This political expression is intolerable to a British state that remains directly complicit through RAF Akrotiri, through the transfer of F-35 components to Israel in Israel's genocide. Tony Benn once said that each generation has to fight the same battles again and again. It seems that he was right because, friends, we have to defend our right to protest just now, just as we have done throughout history, just as we had to do in order to win that right in the first place. Congress, I move.
Thank you, Delegate. Can I now call Aberdeen Trade Union Council to second the amended motion? Thank you.
Hi Congress, Jonathan Christie from Aberdeen Trade Union Council. Congress, since the motion was written, we have seen increased over-policing and police repression in our Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign demos in Aberdeen, with further arrests just over a week ago at a demo against an Israeli representative competing at the World Bowls competition in Aberdeen. This peaceful BDS protest was met with 32 police officers turning up and arresting 3 protesters, with 2 out of the 3 protesters spending an hour and a half in a police van. This is on top of February's arrest of 11 peaceful BDS protesters, which saw a response of 16 police officers, including 2 with firearms being deployed. We have seen increased police heavy-handedness against protesters, intimidation tactics against protesters, with the police arresting protesters at their homes. This is at a time when a genocide is being committed by Israel on the Palestinians in Gaza over the last 18 months, which has seen 60,000 Palestinians being slaughtered, mostly women and children, supported by Keir Starmer and the Labour government, that the ICJ has ruled a plausible genocide. The police should be arresting war criminals, not protesters. So as trade unions and activists, it's a duty that we stand up against this injustice and police repression. Protest is a human right, and this is a threat to all activists' right to protest. So please, call on the trade unions to defend right to protest, use your voice to call it Gaza genocide, take BDS action, and show solidarity with the people of Palestine. Congress, please support this motion. Yeah.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call on any supporting or opposing speakers. Stuart, thank you.
President. Congress, Stuart Graham, Unison Scotland, speaking in support of amended motion. I suppose I just want to make a couple of points because previous speakers have said all that we really need to say in the context, but this is about Article 9, Article 10 and Article 11 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is given domestic effect with the Human Rights Act, which is written into the Scotland Act. It's your freedom of conscience, it's your freedom of expression, and for us in particular, Article 11 is your right for freedom of assembly. See, if we don't defend these rights, then they're going to come after us for whatever we try to do. These are negative obligations, so the obligation is just on the state to not interfere with our rights. And I would also say there's probably Article 6 implications to this too, because they are intentionally and falsely proactively pursuing prohibited behaviour that the state's supposed to guarantee. They are proactively pursuing people on false grounds because of a Zionist lobby and because of the strength of the oil and gas lobby. Basically to fail to speak up at a state level to prevent genocide and climate breakdown. So please support this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Congress, that was amended motion 101, defending the right to protest. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I will now move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Amended motion 101, defending the right to protest, is carried. Congress, before we move to next business, I have spotted Richard Leonard, MSP, in Congress Visitor section over here. Congress, I'm sure most of you know Richard and his decades of work within our movement. He knows both sides of Congress, which I didn't know, but I'm going to enlighten you, Congress. Having worked for the STUC back in the day, having supported delegations to Congress from the Union, the GMB, and having addressed this Congress as leader of Scottish Labour Party. Day and day, Richard has supported our movement in Parliament, on demonstrations and on picket lines, and I'm sure most of you in this room have stood alongside Richard on those picket lines. Richard has announced his intention not to stand as an MSP next year, meaning that this will be his last Congress and attending in that capacity. We all hope and trust that we won't see the last time, that won't be the last time Richard joins us, and we'll see him again in his wider capacity as a true loyal friend and member of the Labour movement in Scotland, and a true friend and activist for the trade union movement. Richard Leonard. Congress, could all organisations who have submitted motions and amendments in relation to Palestine please note there will be a meeting, will be held tomorrow at 9:20 in Standing Orders Room, and the STUC Secretariat in the Dressing Room 5. If you require directions, ask a member of STU staff or Caird Hall staff. Please come to Dressing Room 5 at 9:20 tomorrow morning. Congress delegates, I am now pleased to introduce Tara Lillis to address Congress. Tara is the Vice Chair of the Scottish Women's Committee and Policy Officer for NASUWT. You're very welcome, Tara. Please address Congress.
Thank you, President, Congress. I am so deeply honoured to be addressing the 128th STUC Congress on behalf of the STUC Women's Committee. And it's great to see you in this fantastic city of Dundee, a city rich with culture, with history and with trade unionism. And I stand here today a proud trade unionist, as well as current policy official at NASUWT, the Teachers' Union. It's a privilege to be here. And I want to recognise that I've had many rights and privileges in life that others haven't. The right to access higher education and the privilege to take part in it. the right and privilege of a safe and secure home, and I haven't faced the same prejudice and barriers faced by those, for example, who have not been born in the UK or those who don't have English as their first language. But today I'm privileged to be one of the vice chairs of the STUC Women's Committee, a committee that has been in existence since 1927. In our 98 years, we've seen Scotland and indeed the world change in so many ways. And throughout it all, the STUC Women's Committee has been at the forefront, fighting for the rights of Scotland's women workers. Congress, we meet at a time of great crisis, with instability and uncertainty permeating our politics, while wars are ravaging across the world. Here in the UK, as has already been discussed today, the far right have been gaining traction in our workplaces and in our communities. The populist right may say that they protect women, but we are not foolish enough to fall for this. The right have never been fans of women's freedom. They do not support our right to bodily autonomy, they do not support our right to be safe from gender-based violence, and they certainly don't support our right to fair pay. And on top of this growing unease, we have right-wing politicians and media trying to pit us against each other. They are trying to pit women against women, creating a false narrative that our rights are in opposition, all while sowing division and inflaming tensions. But trade union women's movement will not leave our LGBT+ sisters, our black sisters, our migrant sisters, and our disabled sisters behind, because an injury to one is an injury to us all, and we will not be divided. And colleagues, we know where the real problems lie. These tactics are being used to divide and distract us from the pressing problems in Scotland today, including right-wing populism, lack of public services, job precarity, and the ever-increasing cost of living and climate breakdown. We also know the solution to many of these issues, and I tell you, they don't come with billionaires coming down to save us. It's up to us. It's up to us to fight for what we know is right. It's up to us to build pressure, to make so much noise we can't possibly be ignored, to campaign, to build power in our workplaces and communities, and to take action. This Congress gives you, as trade unionists, the opportunity to debate and discuss how we improve the lives of workers and our communities. You've already heard some very powerful contributions today on how we can tackle the far right, end exploitation of migrants, improve healthcare for trans people, and defend our right to protest. And it's great to see so many issues primarily affecting the most marginalised members take centre stage, at a time worldwide when many are trying to roll back this progress. And later this week, many more vital motions will be debated. Motions that cover such pertinent issues as rebuilding vital public services after years of erosion and improving our public transport systems for everyone. Motions that cover how we can make our education system better for workers and for pupils and build on the New Deal for working people. I know that by the end of this Congress, we will have our work cut out for us. And in the Women's Committee, we've been working tirelessly to carry out the work set by our own conferences. Based on motions to the conferences, the committee priorities have included Food for Thought campaign, which calls for universal free school meals, campaigns to tackle sexual harassment, fight for better women's health services, as well as prioritising actions to promote women within the trade union movement and improve women's rights at work. We've lobbied party political leaders to use their powers to include funding for free school meals in their budget, and we continue to lobby the Scottish Government to fund free school meals for all school pupils. Our campaigns have been highlighted in the media on various occasions, and the support from the public continues to be incredible. We carried out a still silent survey looking at how prevalent sexual harassment is in our workplaces as a follow-up to our original report, Silence is Compliance. And we've been campaigning for all of the recommendations to be fully implemented. We produced a short manifesto calling on political parties ahead of the 2024 UK general election to commit to expand universal free school meals, invest in women's health services, ensure women have the right to a safe workplace free from sexual harassment, commit to close the gender pay gap, expand free childcare, increase representation of young women, embed gender budgeting and invest in public services. And we have also committed to joint working with the LGBT+, disabled, young and black workers committees of the STUC to ensure that an intersectional approach is taken. Whether that involves lobbying activity around black women's experience of maternity and postnatal care, supporting young women to shadow tutor at our Women's Weekend School, exploring shared opportunities to promote learning about neurodiversity in women, or promoting solidarity between trans women and feminists to diffuse right-wing moral panic. Trade union sisters are at the forefront of fighting for our rights, both at home and abroad. And we cannot forget our sisters across the globe. As the genocide in Palestine continues, we must continue our fight for peace. We cannot stand by while thousands of innocent people are brutally killed, when children are left orphaned, wounded, and malnourished, and when parents are crying out for those that they've lost. The situation has reached new, unprecedented levels of brutality. When we push for peace and equality, we can't leave anyone behind at home or abroad. And it's this unwavering international solidarity with oppressed people which is one of the aspects that makes our movement what it is. And we see women taking up positions of leadership across this movement. Some of them a direct result of attending the fantastic STUC Women's Weekend School, which builds women's skills and confidence to share their viewpoint and raise their voices. And indeed, we can see formidable women across our movement. There are leaders in UCU, Unison, EIS, PCS, among others. There are branch officers, our workplace reps, our health and safety reps, and our faithful members who come to every meeting and point out issues that others may not see or choose to ignore. Women are invaluable to our movement. And for many of us, the work doesn't stop there. Across Scotland, many women are going home to pick up much of the care work in their own households and extended families, caring for elderly family members, caring for children, caring for their neighbours. This labour goes unpaid and often unnoticed. So to all the women out there, we see you. But as women, we do not accept our lot in life. That's not what we do. We press ahead, inspiring each other, building coalitions, forming campaigns, leading strikes, and winning. Because when women win, we all win. And so we must continue. We need to continue for our sisters in precarious work, our sisters trying to keep unfunded public services going, and our sisters fleeing violence and coercion. Conference, solidarity to all our sisters. And on behalf of the STC Women's Committee, thank you all for your continuing support.
Thank you, Tara. A fantastic contribution this afternoon to STUC Congress. Tara, can I give you this very small token of our appreciation for your address this afternoon? Thank you. Congress, we are now going to move on to section 4 of the agenda, transport. I now call on Composite E, covering motions 22 and 23, growing Scotland's railways and GBR. And can I see the mover of that motion, the composite motion from the RMT? Thank you, colleagues. Colleagues, we are slightly ahead of time, so can I ask movers to be mindful of the time so that we can keep business flowing? Thank you. Sorry, delegate, just down at the rostrum, please. Thank you.
Ready? Sweet.
Delegates, we're at a crossroads today for Scotland's railways. Public ownership of ScotRail and the Caledonian Sleeper were hard-won victories for us, victories that promised to put our members and passengers before profit. But ownership alone is not enough. We welcome public ownership. It's the foundation to reinvest in services and not shareholders. But the Scottish Government's management is failing to meet its own ambitions. They tried to extend driver-only operation on the Barhead and East Kilbride lines. And together with ASLEF, we defeated it. Why? Because we recognise having a guard on a train is not a luxury, it's an absolute necessity for safety, for accessibility, for vulnerable passengers and for women and girls who've got to travel late at night. Slashing ticket offices and slashing ticket office hours at 101 stations isn't reckless, isn't just reckless, it's undemocratic. 98% of respondents to the public consultation opposed these cuts, including campaigns far too many that joined with us in the RMT to mention who contributed to that, but they were ignored. Scrapping off-peak fares and hiking prices is a betrayal. Rail must be affordable to shift people from cars to trains. And we've seen an unprecedented rise in violence on the transport network, and what we're calling for is a particular and special change in the law, just like we've got for the retail workers. So if you assault a transport worker, it carries an extra penalty. And then there's outsourcing. Right now, 180 million a year is leaked out of the railway in Scotland through Network Rail to its supply chain. That's not value for money. And what we see is endless reorganisation and redundancy situations. The UK government's move to Great British Railways is a good step. Integration could save millions. It's important to end fragmentation. But we're absolutely clear that we cannot trade Scottish control on the railway for centralisation. Great British Railways must enhance the role of Scotland in delivering the railways in this country, and we've got to make sure that what we see is no more outsourcing, no more profiteering from the rolling stock companies, and eventually we've got to see it all brought back into public ownership. So what do? Over the next period, we've got to carry on our fight to make sure that there are no more cuts, that every train and every station is staffed, that we invest in rail because every pound you spend brings £2.50 back into the economy, and that we end outsourcing, because right now we've got hundreds and hundreds of workers right away across the railway, whether they're cleaning the trains or working out on the infrastructure, who are outsourced. We've got to see those people brought back into the railway proper and given the proper terms and conditions that they deserve. So we're going to carry on that fight, and we won't rest until Scotland's railways are safe, secure and in public hands and part of a broader strategy to make sure that we have got an economy that works for ordinary people and keeps our country afloat. Solidarity.
Thank you, Derek. Can I add a special welcome to Eddie Dempsey in his capacity as General Secretary of the RMT. Thank you for your speech and addressing our STUC Congress today. Can I call on the seconder of the amended motion, ASLEF?
Congress, Tony Dale, ASLEF, seconding Composite E. Congress, progress has been made in Scotland with both ScotRail and the Caledonian Sleeper being brought into public ownership, cutting out the wastage that privatisation saw, with profits being extracted via public subsidy to private shareholders rather than the money being reinvested into the railways for the betterment of Scotland. The railways in Scotland currently support over 500 million a year in tourism spend in cities, towns, villages and rural areas, and provide over 1 billion in non-user benefits through less road congestion, lower emissions, better air quality and less accidents. To help grow these benefits, we must continue to ensure that the railway in Scotland stay publicly owned, and as part of this, we must continue to push for the Caledonian Sleeper to be brought into ScotRail. Is that my red light? It is vital that we continue to lobby the government to grow Scotland's railways across passenger and freight services, both domestic and cross-border, to grow the economy, as well as environmental and societal benefits that our railways provide. Congress, we must not forget the important role that rail freight plays and the potential it holds. Despite this, currently, the public of Scotland have no meaningful role in the operation of rail freight. We must continue to push the government to create a nationalised freight operator, ensuring that Scotland can control rail freight in Scotland. As Great British Railways is due to be established by the UK's government, we must ensure that Scotland keeps growing passenger services and looks to establish a growing publicly owned freight service. If Scotland is slow to stake a claim, we risk less control over cross-border services, as Great British Railways will be looking to maximise capacity on the East and West Coast Main Line in the English regions. Congress, it's important that we grow our railways and services, ensuring that the needs and wants of Scotland are factored into the infrastructure and timetable plans of the future. As both the East and West Coast main lines, which are vital for cross-border passengers and freight services, are already close to capacity, with mayors in both the North West and North East of England already publicly stating a desire to take on the rail services in their regions. It is imperative that we campaign and raise our concerns around the impact that this devolution, if delivered without the right checks and balances, could have on the railways in Scotland. Congress, we must ensure that any new legislation set in Westminster on rail reform and devolution of rail understands the interconnected reality of the railway infrastructure and respects and gives precedence to the needs of a nation over the English region. By raising these issues now, we can ensure that legislation to both Great GBR and facilitates the devolution of passenger services in England properly takes into account the role of the Scottish Government and protects the devolution of transport in Scotland. Congress, please support.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call on any other speakers supporting or opposing the composite motion. No. That was composite E, covering motions 22 and 23, growing Scotland's railways and GBR. Please note that the General Council's recommendation is to support. I will now move you to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Composite E, covering motions 22, 23, growing Scotland's railway and GBR, is now carried. Thank you. Congress, I now move to motion 24, ending peak rail fares. I invite Aslef to move the motion. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Lillian. President, Congress, Jim Baxter, Aslef, moving motion 24, ending peak rail fares. I'm using my phone because I forgot to print my speech off, and I'm hoping my mum doesn't phone to make sure I've got a clean shirt on. In 2021, during COP26, Aslef, along with our sister rail unions, RMT, TSASA and Unite, launched their campaign document, A Vision for Scotland's Railway. Within that, we called for many changes to improve our rail industry, including the renationalisation of Scotland's railways, a second person on every train, free rail travel for under 24-year-olds and over 60s, fully staffed stations, green bonds to be used for investment in the railways, and an end to peak fares. Now, I'm sure you all remember at that time the Scottish Government's commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030. Getting people out of cars and onto rail is a massive step towards achieving this. So we campaigned to have peak fares scrapped, and in October 23, the Scottish Government agreed to a trial of scrapping these unfair taxes on Scotland's workers. During this trial, there was an increase of 7% in passengers using the railway. Now, despite this increase, which equates to 10 million additional journeys, an increase in wider economic and societal benefits, the Scottish Government still chose to reintroduce peak fares at the end of September last year. And this has been compounded with a recent increase of 3.8%, which has seen over the last 2 years increase to 12% in train fares. And what have the Scottish Government given the hard-pressed workers of Scotland? Yet another pay cap. Congress, the battle is far from over. We fight on. And last week, ASLEF launched their latest campaign document, A Public Vision for Financing Scotland's Railways. That rolls right off the tongue. Written on our behalf by Andy Cumbers and Grace Brown at the University of Glasgow and supported by the guys at Unity Consultancy. This paper comes at a time when the Scottish Government is undertaking a procurement process to renew some of Scotland's ageing rail fleet. If the Scottish Government is to continue with the current procurement model, this will allow involvement in rolling stock owning companies, we call them Roscoes, in our railway. Continuing with the profiteering and extraction of public wealth for the railway, with previous schemes involving Roscoes being 70% more expensive than publicly financed investment. And currently 25% of rail fares in Scotland go to these Roscoes. This leaves the rail network and dividends, and ultimately leaves the economy to go offshore. This is a failed system that also discourages the reduction in rail fares. So in 1999, I'm sure all you remember this, the opening of the Scottish Parliament, and one of the ethoses of that Parliament was to look at doing things in a different way. So in our report, we've highlighted the failings of the system that are in place, and we're challenging the Scottish Government to do just that. We're challenging them to be bold, to be brave, and to stare down the lobbyists for the parasites who have sucked huge sums of public funding out of our industry and society as a whole. It's time to tell these parasites, you've had your fill, now go. Instead, let's utilise green bonds to finance publicly owned trains. Congress, integrated transport is the key to connecting our communities, bringing investment to local areas and keeping our commitment to the planet. We believe that creating a public finance model that sees the money lost at the moment in profits instead reinvested in rolling stock and real infrastructure, in staffing and in scrapping peak fares. Investment in public transport is the only way to tackle transport poverty. Scrapping peak fares is integral to this. We must shift the government's focus and ensure that we build that integrated system. Congress, support Scotland's hard-pressed workers, support a better economy, support a greener Scotland. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I now call on a seconder for the motion. Thank you.
Alan O'Hare, Transport Salaried Staff. Just in a very quick second. I've got absolutely nothing prepared. But what I do know is that a train fare from the coast down in Ayrshire into the city costs you more than an hour's minimum wage. And it never used to. So scrap your peak fares. Let's get a fare down below an hour's wage. Why should you have to work for that first hour of the day just to have a job? Scrap peak fares. I support.
Thanks, Delegate. I now call on any other supporting or opposing speakers. No further speakers. That was motion 42, ending peak rail fare. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I will now move you to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 24, ending peak rail fare, is carried. I now call on amended motion 25, Save Scottish Ticket Offices. I invite TSSA to move the amended motion. Thank you, Delegate.
Yeah, that was quick. Alan O'Hare again, Transport Salaried Staffs Association, this time for motion 25 to Save Scottish Ticket Offices. Congress ask that you read our motion and do so with a pen in hand, because ScotRail's changed the goalposts. 97 stations are now marked for a reduced facility time, but they've done so at the cost of 6, which were proposed to increase hours. So the original dozen of increased hours is now only 6. And who are the stakeholders that ScotRail worked with to give us those changes? I could talk for an age on the benefit of staffed railway stations, and I'm sure most of you know all the key benefits. That's skilled staff member, serving a ticket counter, finding you the best fares, the best routes, providing quick answers, knowing who to contact should there be an issue in the station, should you require assistance, for all manner of things. That human presence, that presence that provides security. Motion 55 of this Congress covers women's safety, travelling to and from work. An unstaffed station jeopardises that safety, bringing an increased risk of antisocial behaviour that affects women, vulnerable passengers, nay, all passengers. The STUC Disabled Workers Conference, I'm sure they're going to raise the point of turn up and go during their speech, and how the lessening of staff hours cuts this vital right to travel. Just at a time when our railway, our railway, the one that the government owns, for the public, by the public, it's increasing in passengers. Yet the Scottish Government's arm's-length company, ScotRail, is cutting service hours, pushing passengers to digital vending. That smartphone, which I've left back there, oh no, my ticket was on it. I better go back and how am I going to get through the bar, All these wee purchasing routes and little savings that they think they're making that are causing problems and issues that the guy at the ticket office can help with. I said at the start I could speak for an absolute age on this. Congress, ScotRail are on record saying, we'll continue to work with our stakeholders at all levels to ensure that everyone can travel on Scotland's railway with confidence. Yet you're cutting staffing, you're cutting the hours of availability. How are you going to continue with the other one? Our accessible travel service provides free assistance to people who need a little extra help, whether it has been booked in advance or not. Yet you turn up at the station and there's nobody there. Congress, it's quite simple. Please support our motion campaign. Keep your ticket office open. Fight against any staff reduced hours. Fight against any reductions. Because as soon as hours start to drop, staff will get lost through the back door. They always find a way. Support a transport system that's safe and accessible to all. Chair, as always, thank you for the time. Floor, ask for your support.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call on the STUC Disabled Workers Conference to second the amended motion. Thank you.
Chair Conference, Claire Sweeney from the Disabled Workers Committee. I think you kind of says it all, and I better talk about turn up and go now. I'm a huge advocate, the Disabled Workers Committee are huge advocates for independence and promoting independence in disabled people. But sometimes you can't be independent without having additional support and considerations around your accessibility. And some of us can't just turn up and go because we need assistance on the train. You need to know that the train's there. You need to know that it's your train. You need to know where the doors are. You need help on that train. You need help purchasing a ticket. A lot of the tickets that disabled travel card holders need to buy can't be purchased online. They can't be purchased at that really handy machine at the ticket office. They need to be purchased through a real life person. Accessibility matters so much at our train stations, and that does go hand in hand with having somebody there. It's also really nice to have somewhere to go where you can have a seat where your bum isn't angled at 45 degrees and your feet aren't dangling off the floor. It's nice to go to a proper shelter where there's heat, and that often comes with a staff ticket office. Booking seats as well is really, really important. Some people do not pay through disabled travel cards. They don't pay for a fare, but they will still need ticketing considerations, and that might not always be an accessible space. It might just be having a seat that is reserved for you on a train. I spoke about accessibility, and now I'm going to talk about safety. Do you know, I can be quite gung-ho and just kind of put my own needs at risk for the sake of catching a train. But I'm a mum, and I'm a mum to a 14-year-old who loves what they call doing a ballock and back on the train. So I need to consider her safety as well. My station is not in the city. It's a quiet station. However, in recent years there have been 2 sexual assaults at that station during the day. There was also a kind of physical altercation where somebody tried to put people onto the tracks. And I was coming back on the train just last week and somebody was having a mental health crisis at the station. Now, help points are great. They're even better if you can see them. They're even better if you can hear them. And they're even better if your communication needs a link in with that person on the other side of the help point. But I don't know what one of them help buttons would have done in the cases there where there has been sexual assaults, where there has been physical assaults, and where there's people having real mental health issues and mental health kind of dilemmas at train stations. Those would be massively helped by having trained staff, trained skilled staff at our stations. We need staff at our stations, so I'm asking you please to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I now move to any other supporting or opposing speakers. No other speakers in the debate. That was amended motion 25, save Scottish ticket offices. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I will now move you to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Amended motion 25, save our ticket offices, is carried. I now call motion 26, delivering alternative fuels for decarbonising maritime and wider networks in Scotland. I invite Nautilus International to move the motion. Thank you, Colin.
President, Congress, Martin Gray, Nautilus International, moving motion 26, delivering alternative fuels for decarbonising maritime and wider networks in Scotland. A mouthful of emotion, or at least the title is anyway, but a really simple concept. It's about building, it's about growth, it's about ensuring Scotland's infrastructure is reflective of its needs and is fit for the future. It's about setting standards and delivering those standards consistently and ensuring that capability and ambition align so that we develop demand for alternative fuels as well as the supply of alternative fuels that are going to be essential in transport and other sectors delivering a transition away from carbon in this economy. In shipping, it is about the process capability to commercially support LNG, LPG, methanol, hydrogen, and other alternative fuels that have lower and in some instances very low to no carbon impact. It's about jobs, jobs in Scotland, jobs for building the infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure, jobs for supporting the skills as we move towards low and no carbon transport and a low and no carbon economy. It supports a sustainable shift towards those technologies. I'm sure many of you are aware of Scotland's most famous ferry, the Glen Sannox, at the moment, dual fuel LNG. I'm sure some of you may be aware that the LNG that it will operate on is shipped by road to Scottish ports for it to be bunkered and burnt in its engines. And this is because Scotland does not have the infrastructure to allow for the bunkering and for the production and storage of the LNG it requires. This motion is about correcting that and building infrastructure to support transport and other networks so that we are not in a ridiculous situation where fuel for a ferry that operates between Scottish ports is needing to be shipped up from Kent. It's about having a plan. It's about not banning things, but moving towards them gradually, sustainably, ensuring jobs and workers are at the forefront of this. It's underpinning an industrial evolution, not a revolution, and making sure that workers and communities are not left behind and are brought forward at the same pace as technological shift. Congress, I move.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call on a seconder for the motion. Thank you.
Hello, Congress. My name is David Douglas, RMT. Just to, Martin's made it very easy for me to second this, so I'll keep it brief. The reality is that the shipping industry, the process, the things that happen running a ship make it a very, very filthy business. Not just managing them the way P&O and DP World do as well, but the actual day-to-day run of a ship is pretty manky, and it's a very toxic environment to work in. Even the cleaner side of things with passenger ferries and cruise ships and so on. So in order to decarbonise and do the things that Martin's mentioned, we have to really address this properly if we're going to seriously change things within the shipping industry. Infrastructure is at the top of that list. We need a new generation of seafarers in all grades who have the skills required, and the current seafarers are upskilled properly. You've heard us discuss skills passports in the past. We've talked about it for so long now, and I've still to see one. It's been going on for almost a decade. So let's make sure that the government agencies start to come good with those sort of things. And really, we need the investment. We need to stop playing this game. We need to start seeing it now. Grangemouth's a great start. Let's turn that around as quickly as we can and turn it into something viable. And let's make sure that we do end up with a proper and just transition for our maritime grades. I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Delegate. I now call any other supporting or opposing speakers in the debate. No further speakers. That was motion 26, delivering alternative fuels for decarbonising maritime and wider networks in Scotland. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I will now move you to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 26, delivering alternative fuels for decarbonising maritime and wider networks in Scotland, is carried. I now move to motion 27, vessel replacements on Shetland and Orkney ferry routes. Can I invite Nautilus International to move the motion? Thank you.
Congress, President, Grant Udy of Nautilus International, proposing motion 27, vessel replacement of Shetland and Orkney ferry routes. First time delegate and speaker. To begin to understand the scope of this Congress, the oldest Shetland ferry is the Hindra, built in 1982. The oldest Orkney ferry, the Varrigan, built in 1988. Both fleets have an average age of approximately 31. For those lucky to have not hit this milestone yet, when you get past 30, you get a lot of niggling aches and pains. You can't do things you maybe used to do, and you're not as spry as you used to be. This is also very true in shipping and with ferries. Imagine trying to find an engine or parts for a 1988 Ford Escort. Now imagine that the engine is in fact the size of a Ford Escort, twice as hard to find and equally antiquated. These difficulties and these repairs impact reliability and resilience for a lifeline service for island residents. These services are more than a waterborne bus service. If the bus is out, you might be able to walk, you might be able to cycle, but if the ferry's out, well, the only way you're walking is with divine intervention. These services underpin island life. Businesses, emergency services, fishing, agriculture, even rockets are reliable and rely on a regular functioning ferry service. Today, we've heard on the steps outside this very building heartbreaking figures about worker deaths. Imagine losing someone you love only to find out that they could have been saved if only the ferry was working. The Scottish Government needs to act now to ensure that Northern Ireland communities are not abandoned, that the Scottish Government learns the lessons from the mistake of the Western Isles, and they take action to replace these ageing vessels. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder for the motion?
Hello again, Congress. I'll just remind you, my name is David Douglas, I'm RMT.